The Gospel reading for this morning comes from the 28th chapter of Matthew. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him." This is my message for you. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." This is the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Thanks be to God. Have you ever had a resurrection take place in your life? Maybe it was a houseplant you thought that you had killed, but somehow it came back even better and stronger and greener. Maybe it was an appliance you thought for sure was a goner, but somehow was able to be fixed and kept running. Or maybe it was something bigger, a relationship or a job that you thought were over, but somehow they were able to be renewed and given new life and vitality. Or maybe, like author and commentator David Sedaris, you've seen a more dramatic resurrection in your life. He recounts the time when the family dog Duchess gave birth to a litter of puppies, and after all the puppies were born, the runts of the litter seemed to have died, but Sedaris' mother took the puppy and put it into a casserole dish and popped it into the oven, and when Sedaris and his sisters reacted with horror, their mother responded, "Oh, keep your shirts on. I'm not cooking him, I'm just keeping him warm." The heat revived the sick puppy, Sedaris said, and left us believing that our mother was capable of resurrecting the dead. What stories of resurrection remind us of is that resurrection is only needed, indeed resurrection is only possible when things appear at an end. You cannot resurrect something that's going well. Only relationships on the rocks can be resurrected. Only careers and jobs that are lapsing can be resurrected. Only failing health can be resurrected. Only when the baseball season appears to be over before it's even begun can it be resurrected. Only lives that have ended can be resurrected. And I say all that because it might be obvious that death and resurrection go together, but I think sometimes we forget that. And we need to remember that, especially in times of quarantine and of social distancing, of being locked at home, that we need to remember in this time when we so desperately want and hunger for a return to normal. We have to remember that resurrection comes out of darkness, that Easter comes out of Good Friday. Resurrection only comes after the death and the tomb. And it means so much because of those things. Indeed, this Holy Week and this Easter have a different meaning, have had a different sense of importance probably for most of us because of what we are experiencing as a town, as a state, as a nation, and as a world. And in that, we have much in common with what the women and the disciples were experiencing in those last days. In Matthew's account of Jesus' death and burial, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, which Mary it is not exactly clear, they sit and wait. They observe. They see Jesus being put into the tomb. And so they're sitting and waiting. They don't bring spices to anoint the body that day, as we read in Mark and Luke. Instead, they're simply going to be at the tomb, to just sit. Again, they had been there when the body had been placed into the tomb, and the tomb closed up by Joseph of Arimathea, who most of us are familiar with because of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And then they waited. And on Saturday, on the Sabbath, they simply sat and waited. And while they are waiting, the disciples are somewhere else, also holed up in a room somewhere together, and they too are waiting. They're afraid for their lives. They're afraid that if they go out, that they could lose their life. Does that sound vaguely familiar? Everything they had known, their sense of normalcy is gone. They have no idea what the future will bring. They're sitting in that in-between time, and then we're told that there is a great earthquake as the two Marys approach the tomb. And so as I was thinking about Matthew's accounts of the resurrection several months ago, as I was preparing for Lent and Easter, I was sort of contemplating the damage that earthquakes do and the recovery that comes after an earthquake occurs and how that plays into the Easter story. Never imagining what was about to happen to us, and that I would be preaching to a basically empty sanctuary this morning. Even as I began hearing of other clergy from other denominations who were saying they were being advised that more than likely they should not plan on holding Easter worship in their sanctuaries, I couldn't believe it. It didn't seem real. I couldn't imagine an Easter that was not filled with people with shouting together and singing the great songs of Easter. And yet, here we are. And so we sit in the midst of our own metaphorical earthquake, wondering what's going on, and more importantly, wondering what comes next. In 1903, French ethnographer Arnold van Gennep published his seminal work entitled The Rites of Passage. And this book was important for several reasons, one of them being because it was hugely influential to Joseph Campbell for his text, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which then influenced a small art house film entitled Star Wars, which is all about hope. And I get ahead of myself there. But in talking about the rites of passage, Van Gennep coined the term liminality. And he took the term from the Latin word limen, which referred to a stone that was placed in the threshold of a doorway. It was a physical thing that had to be crossed over as you were coming from the outside into the inside or leaving one room and going to another room. You had to cross over the limen. And so as he was talking about rites of passage, he said that in rites of passage we have this space where one thing ends, but the new thing has not yet begun. And so he said that space, that in between, was a liminal space. One space had entered, but the new time and space had not yet begun. And that's that sense of Holy Saturday. Jesus had died and is in the tomb. What had been was over. All the dreams and ideas and promises and beliefs of what people had about who Jesus was had stopped. But they didn't know yet what the future would bring. That's that liminal space. The past is over, but the future has not yet been decided. And we are living in that in-between space. We are living in a liminal time. Just like with the disciples and the Marys, that space can be very uncomfortable. And much of that comes from what we have to leave behind. Susan Beaumont says that liminality always begins with an ending, an experience of loss. And humankind resists loss. We also resist the unknowing, she says, the unknowing inherent in the not yet, or the not quite yet, and the loss of control over our own sense of destiny. So if we pay attention to what happens with the women as they go to the tomb on that first morning, we are told that after they encounter the angel, that they leave the tomb in fear and in great joy. And I think that fear is not just encountering the angel, but also over the sense of loss and the unexpectedness of what is happening. That's about the past, about shutting off the expectation that they were only going to find a tomb and they were just going to be there to be at the tomb. And yet we have the sense about the future because there is great joy as well. They are experiencing these two things because they're in that in-between space. That's that earthquake in their lives that's left them in shock and disorientation. And disorientation is a common aspect of liminal time. And we see that because the women have to keep being told the same thing. Both Jesus and the angel report the same message and tell them, go tell the disciples to go to Galilee, and there they will encounter the risen Christ. And so there's that in-between time even there, the liminal time between the death and the resurrection, now between resurrection and going to Galilee. What is past is gone, but what will yet be is undetermined. And when the disciples hear that message, they have to be pretty excited because they're going back home, the place to where it all started. And there's significant comfort in home. And yet they're not going back to the homes that they knew, to the normal lives that they knew, because everything else has now changed. The world has dramatically changed, and nothing will ever be the same for them or for the world. And yet they move past that sense of loss into the unknown, into the not quite yet. And in doing so, they give up their own sense of destiny, because the story of Easter moves from the question of what are we going to do, what are they going to do, to the more important question, what is God doing? So one of the things that happens in liminal time, because we've left behind our ordinary existence, our normal patterns, our normal routines, is that we are open to new experiences and new realities. There's a Celtic saying that says the distance between heaven and earth is 3 feet, but in thin spaces that distance is even shorter. A thin space is those times in which we encounter God in a deeper and more meaningful way. And often those thin spaces are found in liminal moments in our lives, in those in-between spaces. There are great possibilities in liminal space, time for great joy, but also great liabilities in a sense of loss, a sense of mourning, which is where many of us are. And so we have to remember that death and resurrection are linked together. And we can sing the great songs of Easter only because we have come through the cross and death and the tomb. Spring is so wonderful and amazing only because it comes out of winter. Summer can be great, but the change between spring and summer is not as amazing, it's not as glorious, because the change is not as big as from winter to spring. But to get to spring, to get to resurrection, we have to cross through or over that in-between time, that threshold. And that is where we sit in this moment. In a time in which we are supposed to be gathered here together, the sanctuary is supposed to be full of people celebrating and shouting hallelujahs, we are instead separated in our own spaces, in our own liminal time. And it's not just this liminality of this time of sheltering in place and maintaining special distances from one another, but the church itself is in a liminal time with all the change going on in the church universal. And the country could be said to be in a liminal space as we have large changes happening all around us, and we know that the future of the country is going to look very different than the past. And perhaps we even have personal changes happening to us as well. And so in these moments, it's important to give voice to that sense of loss, a sense of grief that can and often is present in liminal moments. Because remember, Mary did not go to the tomb expecting to find life. They expected to find a tomb, a body. They expected to find death. But rather than death, they found new life, a new future, a new reality that was being paved before them. And so in this time, we have to name our grief. To name those things that we have lost, those things that have been shut off for us during this time. And there are lots of different things that are happening. Seniors not being able to graduate or say goodbye. Marriages being postponed. Lots of things that are taking place that we expected to be joyous celebrations like Easter that just aren't happening. We have to learn to express that grief of being able to say goodbye to that normal that we had known, but also to set that we don't know yet what the future brings. But that too is what Easter is about, because Easter is about hope. And Paul says in his letter to the Romans that we don't hope for the things that we can see, the things that we already have. We don't need hope in joyous moments in our lives. We don't need hope in bright situations. We need hope in darkness, in loss. We need hope for those in-between times when what we knew we could count on is gone and past, and we don't know what the future holds, or what it will look like, or perhaps even if we will ever get there. That's when we need God's hope. But that too is part of the Christian journey. In the early days of the church, as we heard about in the 40 days of Lent leading up to celebration of Easter, we heard that in the early church, people could only join the church, could only be baptized on Easter Sunday. So the 40 days of Lent were preparation for that time. And we were supposed to have a baptism this morning, but that too had to be postponed. And baptism is that liminal space. We enter into the waters of baptism, leaving our old selves behind, and on the other side we are reborn and made Christians, new creations in Christ. We die to our old selves and we are reborn. But the water of baptism serves as that threshold, that liminal moment in space, that thin space, where what was past is now gone, but what will be is not yet determined, and it is in that moment that we encounter God, and that God claims us and adopts us and cleanses us and refreshes us. It's in that moment of the baptismal waters that God gives us hope. God gives us the Spirit. So that is where we sit in this moment, and unlike many liminal moments in our lives where we go things through ourselves or do with just a few others, in this moment we are all impacted together. We're all experiencing this together, and some are more affected than others, just like in earthquakes, but we are all being changed because all of us have had to say goodbye to our normal lives. We don't know yet what will come out of this. We don't know yet what the future will look like. We don't know what that world will be. But here are some things I hope for. One is that we will keep washing our hands and we will stay at home when we are sick, because that's just good practice. It also means that we need to make sure that everyone has the ability to stay home when they are sick, that people don't have to choose between going to work in order to pay bills or staying home to get well. And perhaps we'll remember how to slow down and to spend time together and realize what's truly important, which may still include being excited when we see that there's toilet paper at the grocery store. I hope that our sense of gratitude for the people who do the work that make our lives possible, that we normally just take for granted, that we will continue to appreciate what they do for us. I also hope that we remember and learn to live into the fact that we are all in this together. That what happens to people in Asia and Africa and Latin America or in our inner cities impacts all of us. And that walls cannot stop that impact from taking place. And I hope you remember that our health is dependent upon the unhealthiest members of our society. And that some segments of society are more impacted by others because of aspects of their lives, many of which are way beyond their control, but are not beyond the control of what we choose to do as a society and how we allocate resources. And that we remember, as Martin Luther King said, that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. I hope that we will continue beyond this, to be concerned about the most vulnerable members of our societies. Whether they're vulnerable because of age or illness or economic reality or other aspects, that we begin to see the web of interconnectedness that keeps us all bound together. And that what others do impacts us, and what we do impacts others. And we will remember Jesus' injunction from Matthew 25, that whatever we do to the least of these is what we do to Jesus himself. This can be a reckoning moment for us in this liminal time. Because unlike the women who went to that tomb on the first Easter, on this Easter Sunday, we don't know yet what that future looks like. We don't know yet how our resurrection will be played out, what our resurrection story will be. But here is what we do know. Here is how we can celebrate this Easter. And that is to know that not only are resurrections possible, but they happen every single day, not just for houseplants or even for puppies, but they happen for you and for me. They happen for the world, and they are most needed in the darkest moments of our lives, in those liminal moments, in those in-between times, where the past is gone and we don't know yet what the future will be. It is in those times that we might not only cry out to God, but it's in those moments we know that God is present for us, because God tells us that he is present for us. And we know that God is working miracles and bringing and offering hope. Because what Easter tells us and reminds us every single year, but most especially this year, is that God wins, and love wins, and life wins, that God has the final word. Easter is a reminder to us that whatever may happen, that whatever this day holds in store for us, that God has the power and strength to uphold us, and that God gives us that power through the Holy Spirit to uphold and strengthen one another. And that whatever we face, we never do it alone, and that nothing we encounter is stronger or more powerful than God's love for us. Now, that doesn't mean that everything will work out perfect, that all of our prayers will be answered, that there won't be pain and suffering and even death, because those are our realities. But God is not overcome by those things. And we are not overcome by those things because we have God on our side, and we are an Easter people. Grief and loss are a part of life, but they are inextricably tied to hope and to resurrection. And they can't be separated. They hold each other in tension. They can't exist without one another. Grief leads to hope, and loss leads to resurrection. Easter doesn't lead to Good Friday, but Good Friday leads to Easter. And so even as we find ourselves in this in-between time, may we never forget that we are never alone, never abandoned, and never forgotten, because God is with us, most especially in the valleys. And that the promise of life and of hope and of new beginnings is here for us. And we've been here before. In this community, we're approaching the 20th anniversary of the Cerro Grande fire. time when one reality, one way of living ended, and a new one had not yet begun, but when people gathered around in evacuation and loved on one another and cared for one another, were concerned about one another, offering help to people they didn't even know, because that's what we do in these times when we come together as a community. And then we came out on the other side. So we've been there before, and we will be there again. But what we can have faith in this Easter is knowing that Easter is not a one-time event, but something that happens over and over and over again, because we are indeed an Easter people. And our faith resides not in our buildings, our budgets, or even our ability to do good online worship. Our faith resides in Christ and the promise and the power of Easter. Our faith resides in resurrection. The knowledge that God not only makes resurrections possible, but God brings resurrections about, that they happen. So keep watching and keep waiting and stay safe, for we are all God's children. And I know that that is so, my brothers and sisters. Amen.
Amen.